Hello everyone and welcome to the demonstration video. So for this video we're going to go over the concept of Java exceptions, which is something you've probably seen a lot while programming. The only reason why I haven't talked about it yet is because you had to understand the concepts of classes first. So basically an exception is a class, though it's something that's a little more special, something integrated within Java itself. So in this video, we'll describe what exceptions are, what they are for, and then I'll show how to handle them. So there's a specific reason why they're created, and it can help you with 1, debugging your program, or 2, also making your application a little more user-friendly. Alright, so let me go ahead. So exceptions are pretty much any errors that occurred when you run the program. Now what I mean by that is, notice how, like right now, if I want to make an array list, so I want to create a list, which I will be using to show more exceptions, of, let's say these are strings, string. So remember we set up the array list in this way. I'm just going to call this a list. Equals new array list. There we go. And notice these errors are occurring because I haven't imported that package for the Java. So just know that these errors, these are called, you could think of them as compile time errors basically, or syntax errors. Basically, you'll get errors like this when you've written the code incorrectly. So it's not syntax in which Java can read. Remember all the precise things I've been showing you throughout the course with your semicolons, where you're placing the code, how you're formatting the code. Java has to read it in a specific way. Remember, it's its own language and it needs to be written accordingly. So it's very strict, but it's so that it could read the code properly. So in our case, again, it's showing errors, and for these compile time errors, like if I try to compile this, or if I even try to run it, it wants to save, and I notice that it says there's errors in project. If I try to proceed, there we go. This is actually what we consider part of an exception, but this one is because, hey, it came across this here. It came across this line and it cannot read it because, again, array list is not brought in. So exceptions are pretty much just errors. Any errors which Java comes across and will print out to you. Anything that's underlined like this, you could think of it as syntax errors. Sometimes, so remember, if you're on a command line on its own, you have to compile the code first. If you can't compile the code, that's called a compile time error. Now notice this one, it went through, but while running the code, remember it starts at main and it continues down the line. It comes across this line and it gives us this red text. This is an exception and they only appear when we run the program. So exceptions occur when we run it. So while the application is running. And you notice that most likely when you have been coding some of your projects, you may notice that it gives this red text. So in some cases, especially since it's going through a loop, you're going through the loop, then you come across something where maybe the code's incorrect or you gave an incorrect input, and all of a sudden red text starts appearing and the program stops. That's what exceptions will do. So when an exception is thrown, that means the code has come across an error and it does this text. When exceptions are thrown, typically by default, it'll stop the program. So first of all, let's go ahead and clean this up so I could show you a couple of more exceptions that can occur. So this one's just because, hey, it cannot detect what array list is. So let's go ahead and import this package. Import java.util. There we go. And I notice probably it's giving me this because, there we go, because I also had it formatted incorrectly. So now you see that it's able to detect it's able to detect the syntax. And if I run this, I won't get any bad errors. And actually nothing's being printed because I don't have anything print out to the console, but we don't have an exception that's thrown because now we said, hey, import array list into here. All right, let me go ahead and let me show another exception that is thrown. So let's go ahead, let's populate this array list. So we're just gonna do list, add, and let's just add a couple of names. So maybe just different colors, like this one's red. List add blue. And we'll just do green. Let me go ahead and copy this and paste it. Oh, I typed paste, but there we go, green. Perfect. Now, if you remember how arrays work, remember that the first item that we add in, so the first one is always going to start at index 0. So remember, arrays always start at 0 and then it goes up, especially with an array list. We could just keep adding on and on. So red would be at index 0, blue would be at 1, and green would be at 2. Now, if you remember, again, remember how array lists work, it's growing every time we add in a new element. So originally before this, it had nothing. It didn't even have an index at 0. It was just an empty list. When we add red, there's one element, and now there's an index 0. Blue is the next element, so index 1, and then green, next element added, index 2. And this is the only part of the list that currently exists. So up to index 2, only 3 elements. So if I want to print these out, let me go ahead and do system.out print line. And I'm not going to use our loop for this for the sake of the demonstration. I'm going to use the list.at the index. Unless this one is, oh, this one is actually, there we go. So make sure you're remembering your functions. So we're going to get the one at index 0. I'm going to copy that line and then print the one for index 2. Let's do the one at index, well, actually this is index 1, 2. And maybe I've accidentally lost count of my indexes, and I'm going to do one at 3. So watch what happens when I run this. There we go. So it looks like everything's going normally at first. We notice that remember, and especially for debugging, your program goes in order. So remember, it starts at main, and it's going to go down line per line. These are comments, so it's not going to read these. These are only for us to read. This line, it creates the array list called list, okay? And then we add in an element, add in another, and another. And you notice that red, blue, and green are printed out. So these lines, system.out print line, list.get 0, 1, and 2 went through properly. Those were printed. But once we got to 3, remember, this list only goes to index 2. Index 3 does not exist. So once we try to get something from 3, Java throws an error because there doesn't exist an index 3. It throws an exception, and this is what the exception is. Let me show real quick how to read these exceptions, both which can help you with debugging, so figuring out what's wrong with the code, why exactly this error was thrown, or it could also help you figure out how to manage it. So in this case, let's just figure out how to read this. So let's go ahead, let me pull up the console. All right, so always your exception message will start out with exception in thread main. This here will typically indicate the function in which the exception was thrown. So basically the location in which the error occurred. There we go. And you'll also see the location based on all of these ats. it's basically still finding the source for that error. So the very bottom is typically the initial source of it. You could see here that, hey, it's in our Zoom package, week 13 Java file in function main. You could see a shortened version here. The rest of these is more integral to the Java code itself. So you don't really, sorry about that. You don't really need to focus on the rest until if you go down, you get to your code. That's when you could figure out what happened to your code. So this typically the last line, and this over here indicates the specific location in which it occurred, your exception occurred. If you need the specific line, it's right here at the very end. Now this, the java.ling index out of bounds exception, mostly the index out of bounds exception, is the name of the exception itself. So remember, I mentioned that exceptions are classes. So someone went ahead and programmed into Java different errors that can occur, and they're able to detect it and print it out to help us programmers. So you're provided both a name and also a little bit, just a little bit of the why. But most of the time, the why is enough to figure out what's going on. So here's the name itself. You could go ahead and actually research the name on your own. You could go ahead and type Java exception, put out the name, like in this case, it's index out of bounds exception. You could put the whole thing java.lang.index out of bounds exception. And you'll see either forums or articles explaining what exactly it is, and typically the reason for why it's thrown. In other cases, you could see how to even correct it. So again, this is good for your research purposes as well. But also, remember I mentioned the why portion. It's actually right over, sorry about that. Notice when I click on these, it takes me to the file. There we go. But the index 3 out of bounds for length 3. This is basically telling me what I just mentioned earlier. So if you didn't know exactly how array list works, you could read this over here and then start noticing that, for length 3, that means the array list is only has 3 elements. That means there is no index 3. It only goes up to index 2. So remember, the last index is the length minus 1. So it tells you here, index 3 is out of bounds. So it's outside of the realm of this current array list. All right. So that's something that you could come across with an exception. And in this case, if we want to fix it, we just go ahead, comment this out. There we go. And if I run it one more time, you see that our program goes on more clearly. And notice here, let me backtrack here. Let me run. There we go. Notice that the line here, line 23, matches up with this line. So I could just go ahead and comment out the problem area and run it. So that's one exception. I'm going to show you one other exception that you can run into. So there's quite a bit. Some of them are even math related. For example, int, let's just call this a. So we're just going to have a variable a. And I'm going to do 19 divided by 0. All right, watch what happens here. There we go. You could see that even mathematical things, notice that in math, there is no division by 0. Division by 0 is impossible. And Java notices that. And this exception here, so again, you see this one's a lot more precise since it's math-based. We see that occurs at line 25, so we know, okay, this line is giving an error. And we see that's called an arithmetic exception. So something went wrong with the math itself. And the cause over here, division by 0. So it could be something math related. It could also be inputs. For example, let me go ahead and create a scanner class. Scanner, I'm just going to call this stdin. equals new scanner system dot in. Whoop. There we go. All right, and let's go ahead, let's prompt the user to put in their name. So we're going back to the basics. What is your name? And I'm going to do that as print because I want it to be on the same line. And we're going to have the scanner take in the name. So std in, next. There we go. Oh, my bad. It has to be a string. String name. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to get in the name. And then let's get the person's age. So how old are you in years? And this one's going to get in int age std in dot next int. There we go. Okay. And then we'll just print it out back to the user. So we'll just have them print it out. The name. And then the age. Years old. So just a very simple program. Oh. So let's go ahead and run this. So we still have our print statements from above, and it asks what is your name. So I'm going to put ahead Jasmine. How old are you? Maybe for this one, remember it's trying to take in an int, but maybe I decide, oh, I'm going to type in the number itself. So let me just go ahead. I'm just going to start out with, I'm way older than this, but just for the sake of here, I'm just typing in the number 20 as written. And then notice an exception is thrown. There we go. So we see that over here. Oh, let's take a look down here. So if we're not quite sure what's going on, we could look down here, look at the exception, and it says input mismatch exception. Okay, it doesn't really give us any, it doesn't give us the cause here or the why. So you could do some research on it. Here we could kind of do some sleuthing, see maybe what happened. So this one's specifically at line 32. And we could take a look at line 32 over here. Now, I could tell you specifically. So again, you could do the research on this exception name. So remember, look up Java exception based on the name. So you could directly put in that name. But I'll tell you that this exception occurs because, remember, I typed in the actual word 20 as compared to the number 20. Again, disclaimer, I am much older than this, but just know that, there we go. This is the word, not an integer. std in next int is specifically trying to get numbers. So by me putting in strings, it's a mismatch in data types. It's like me trying to put in the name into int. Me trying to do something like int age equals 20. Notice that here it gives me a syntax error because it's a mismatch of types. So same thing here. We're trying to get put in a string with a function that's trying to get a integer, and you're also trying to put that in to an int value over here, an int variable. So there's that exception. If we want to get rid of that, well, actually, in this case, in the program, we can't get rid of it if this is the point of our program. I'd have to, there we go. So if I put in Jasmine, and I'm going to go ahead, there we go. And then notice that the program still goes through perfectly. It's just that the user put in the wrong type of input. So the question is, how do we get around the user doing that? Of course, you could type in over here, numbers only. So let's do that. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, put in my name, And even though it says numbers only, what if someone decides they want to type something out and then accidentally put in a letter? And there we go, the exception is thrown again. Well, that is when we use something called a try-catch block. So remember, some things like this, if someone accidentally breaks the code, there is a way for you to be able to handle it more elegantly as compared to this red text appearing and your program stopping. So a try-catch block works for something very much like this. Let me go ahead. I'm going to start creating it up here. So we're going to not worry about our array list here. We're just going to focus on this. So try-catch block works just like this. So we're going to go ahead. First, I'm going to set up the try. And then we're going to do the catch. So the try block on its own, this is just where you put in the code that can throw exceptions. So typically you want to group up all the code which can be at risk of getting an error. Usually that's anything related to classes. So in this case, a scanner class up here is an array list. Or if you're doing some kind of math, remember with our divide by 0, you could also put it in there. So let me just copy and paste this code. So cut. And I'm going to put it into the try block. So remember, these braces by the try is going to be called the try block. There we go. Now, what the try block is going to do is it's going to basically look out for any exceptions that are thrown. So it'll go line by line. If an error is thrown, like in this case, if an exception is thrown over here, then it's going to go to the catch block. So you could think of it as an if-else statement, only it'll go to the quote-unquote else, the catch, if an error occurs. Now, there's more to the catch block than just the catch and the braces. You're actually going to have to go ahead and put in, let's do a pair of parentheses, and you're going to put in exception E. So you can think of this portion like a parameter or like an argument. Remember, exceptions are classes, so this is actually the class name exception. And then E just indicates the exception that is thrown. So remember earlier the mismatch exception? If we get that exception here in the try block, remember it has to be in the try block, then it will go over to the catch block and then start handling it. So it won't let the program stop, it'll just handle it. So it will go ahead and say, let's do something like this. So let's go ahead and say system.out print line. Please input a number. There we go. And then you could have the program keep on going. So in this case, let's go ahead, and let me show you how this works real quick. So notice that's asking me, so it's still going through, and it just goes into the try block first. So let's go ahead and say, my name is Jasmine. Let's have this one actually be correct this time. So how old are you? Numbers only. I put in my age. It goes through well. We don't get any exception thrown. And notice that it doesn't go into the catch block because no errors were caught. Now let me run this again. Put in my name correctly. But I'm going to go ahead and type in the actual word for the number. So maybe I didn't read this properly. There we go. And you see that the catch block tells you, hey, please put in a number. And then it'll just keep on going with the rest of the program. So if you wanted to continue, you could go ahead and have a looping portion. So let's do this. Let's go ahead. So please input a number. And you could put this within its own try catch and then just have it keep on going over and over until a proper input is given. And then you could do the system out print line. Okay. So that's what try-catch blocks are for. In the case of here, where if you want to still have your code, so it's only broken by the user itself, you could still manage it. Now, some other things you could do. So in the case here, if you still want, like, let's say that error message, because notice you don't get the error message here, you could still format it. So let's go ahead, instead of this please input a number statement, we're going to do something. We're going to do the e.get class. There we go. So we're getting the exception E, and it has a function called get class, which will indicate the exception name. And I'm also going to print out get message, which will print the message that you typically get with it. So let's see how this works. So what is her name? Jasmine. And I'm going to type in some random letters. There we go. And then you see, there we go. So you have the class, and you also see that null. That means it doesn't have an exception. There we go. But not any big red text. So that's perfect. So this does help you out a little bit with, again, not having the program completely stop on the user. You'll just go ahead and print something. They can report it to you or whoever their supervisor or some forum. But it won't completely break. Okay. Now try-catch blocks, notice exception, it works for pretty much any exception thrown. So for example, even before the scanner, if I do this same arithmetic error here, divide by 0, and let's run this. You notice that, there we go. So it goes to the scanner, creates a scanner, an error is thrown, an exception is thrown here. So it goes to the catch block, prints out the class name and the get message. So that is something you can do. Some other things is you could go ahead and just add in a bunch of other catch blocks based on certain exceptions. So remember, each one has a specific name. If you want specific messages for specific exceptions, like in this case, we have the arithmetic exception, you'll just put that in. So instead of exception, this will be the specific class name. So this works kind of like how it does with polymorphism. So if we want to specifically catch this arithmetic exception, we'll say here math error. So if I run this, we see that it only about to put math error. There we go. So you could think of it as different if else statements. If an exception is thrown in the try block, it'll go through an order of these different catch blocks. So here I'll see, okay, was it an arithmetic exception? It is. So we're just going to print out what's in this block, in this portion, and then skip over everything else. If I get rid of this code, there we go. You notice that, again, the error isn't thrown, so we're still continuing in our try block. Let me put in my name, but then let me do the error here. And notice it doesn't print out system out println math error because the specific exception is not in this arithmetic exception. But what it is, in general, is an exception. So I'll go ahead and print this. So if you need different statements for different kinds of errors, maybe to indicate to the user what they inputted was wrong or if something else happened in the program, you could just add on multiple catch blocks after your try block statement. Okay. So those are different ways in which you can manage exceptions. And remember, you could use this class and get message if you still want to print out some of the information. Sometimes if you're programming this on your own, so more specifically if you're trying to run this and test it and there's something really wrong with the code, it'd be best to see the exception go through. But for users, so if you want this for users, you're going to want to use this try catch block just to have it be more elegant. So it doesn't just stop, it will go ahead and handle it. All right, I will leave it there. So just make sure in your assignment, you're asked to specifically 1, name the exception that was thrown for a certain line, and then 2, give the cause for it. So just make sure you're looking through each of those errors, and then make sure you're incorporating the try catch block for each of them. All right, thank you, and I will see you in the next video.